you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So the big story today, John Brennan's security clearance revoked by the president yesterday, former CIA director.
Do you think he's still crying this morning?
Habitual liar. He was crying all over the page of the New York Times about how he's being silenced. Yeah, I know. The irony is lost on him. On MSNBC yesterday about how he's being silenced and, intimidated.
I do believe that Mr. Trump decided to take this action, as he's done with others, to try to intimidate and suppress any criticism of him or his administration. And revoking my security clearances is his way of trying to get back at me. But I think I have tried to voice the concerns of millions of Americans about Mr. Trump's failures in terms of fulfilling the responsibilities of that sacred and solemn office of the presidency. And this is not going to deter me at all.
No, it's clearly not. And thank goodness, despite John Brennan's comparisons of Trump to foreign dictators, despite his suggestion that Trump is a traitor and has committed treason, an offense punishable by death, oh, by the way, Brennan does have access to the media. It seems to me, rather than silencing anybody, Trump wants more communication. Well, it's always more communication. And Brennan's op-ed in the New York Times, President Trump's claims of no collusion are hogwash. So Brennan's still prosecuting his case, the same case that he takes credit for opening up based on pitching that phony baloney dossier around.
Right. And he's called him a traitor and a danger to this country. Brennan's just upset right now and pouting because he can't get the access that he needs to be effective at his job as he's a contributor to NBC.
There's
makes
more
6 figures a year.
I mean, just so we're clear, there's more evidence of Russian collusion against John Brennan than there is President Trump at this point. Because one thing we know is that John Brennan voted for Gus Hall for president in 1976, the Communist Party candidate. So, I mean, if you just want to talk, and you might as well, based on John Brennan's standard of evidence, you might as well spin a conspiracy theory about him the way that he does about Trump just to illustrate the point, because that's what his op-ed does. A bunch of conspiracy theories about people who personally profited, and whether the only question now is whether Trump associates were part of a criminal conspiracy, if it rises to the level of criminality, not just sort of, not illegal collusion with Russians. When in point of fact, what we understand and is coming into clearer focus through Lee Smith's investigation at realclearinvestigations.com. We discussed yesterday, Kim Strassel's reporting, Byron York's reporting, is maybe we've been looking, and the D.C. press corps has been purposely looking at this all the wrong way this entire time. And the only evidence of any collusion with Russian interests was on the Hillary Clinton intelligence and law enforcement agency senior leadership side. So the question is, should you stop with John Brennan, or should you move to some of the other Obama-era officials that are under consideration with respect to their security clearance? Rice and Power and Hayden and Clapper. Maybe even some Department of Justice officials who should be perhaps former Department of Justice officials like Bruce Orr. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Bill Gertz. He is senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon and author of the book I War, War and Peace in the Information Age. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good to be on the program.
Now, I put this to Alberto Gonzalez earlier in the show, but there's a piece by Tom Rogan in the Washington Examiner, left-winger, suggesting that Trump was wrong to suspend Brennan's clearance because there could be ongoing initiatives, operations in CIA where Brennan, even though he has called the president a traitor, may have some insight that would be beneficial to national security. Obviously, that's a determination that the president made the other way. But do you have any concerns that Brennan has any value to add to this administration?
No, I think he's displayed his opposition to the president and his administration, and there's a fundamental misunderstanding about security clearances. Ultimately, the buck stops at the president. A lot of times, the intelligence community seems to think that security clearances are their purview and that they can grant them and take them away, and they've used that as kind of a weapon. They used it early on in the Trump administration by pulling the clearances of people that they didn't like, people that the president had picked to work in the White House, and then the intelligence community said, well, they're not qualified to have security clearances. And I would also point out, too, that this happened under the Obama administration. I know a senior Pentagon contractor, his name is Bill Cowan. He was a Fox News contributor, but he worked on a lot of classified programs, and he made a film. He appeared in a film that was critical of Obama, and as a result of that, they pulled his clearances. So it's not unusual. Brennan's making a lot of noises about having his clearances pulled, but it was certainly appropriate based on all of the comments and things that he had been saying.
Well, the mainstream media is acting like this is unprecedented. This has never happened before, and you're saying that this has happened before, and it probably will happen again. Who do you think else, is on the list that Sarah Sanders read off yesterday that might have their security clearance yanked?
Well, it's kind of a tradition. One of the things that when you grant access to secrets, you want to be very careful about how you handle the people that have access to those secrets. So a lot of times when someone in a very high-level position, we're talking about like the National Security Advisor, or in the case of what they're looking at, I think it's probably Samantha Power, who was the UN ambassador, and Susan Rice, who was the National Security Advisor. You don't want to upset these people, and it's kind of a security measure that you don't want to do things that would turn them into disgruntled former employees. So that's kind of always been the tradition, that you kind of leave these people have some access. They may sit on some kind of advisory boards for intelligence organizations or national security organizations. But in this case, there have been reports. I think the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes has been very instrumental in showing that in the case of Susan Rice and Samantha Power, that they may have acted inappropriately in the so-called unmasking, the misuse of intelligence. In other words, they asked for raw intelligence reports to identify the names of Americans, and this seems to have been part of a pattern at the late Obama administration when they were trying to find out information about so-called Russian collusion. So I would say those two people are probably on the list, Samantha Power and Susan Rice.
And what of the unmasking, and why is it that we can't seem to obtain more information, more specific information about it, and particularly as it relates to General Michael Flynn, the one crime we know that has been committed that nobody seems particularly interested in resolving?
Yeah, I would guess that the reason that Devin Nunes has not been successful in getting access to the records and the trail of unmasking is that there's probably a leak investigation underway, because that seems to be at the heart of a lot of the disclosures that came out early on. There were some really damaging leaks that came out in the very first months of the Trump administration, which revealed that the president's conversations, and I think that this was part of an effort by leftover Obama people to try to undermine the Trump administration. So I think that the reason that Congress is having trouble getting at that is that there's probably some ongoing leak investigation.
You're sort of at the intersection of this conversation, both with your intel expertise as well as being a member of the media, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon. And so the media's lionizing of John Brennan is fascinating to me, the lack of institutional memory or the purposeful forgetfulness. John Brennan, who supported the enhanced interrogation techniques, torture, post 9/11, that the media vilified Dick Cheney over. John Brennan, who lied to Congress about CIA hacking into the computers of members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. John Brennan, who lied to Congress and the American people about the collateral damage inflicted by drone strikes. I mean, this is somebody who 4 years ago, liberal op-ed writers were calling for President Obama to fire, but now because he's a vociferous critic of Donald Trump, he's what he calls Bob Mueller, a national treasure.
Yeah, a lot of hypocrisy there on the part of the mainstream media. I would also add that Brennan instituted a number of really disastrous reforms when he was the head of CIA, according to my sources and who were part of the CIA at the time. He basically devastated the operations directorate by mixing in to the operators a number of analysts, and in so doing, he sort of politicized the CIA in a major way. And those reforms haven't been undone. The CIA is still in kind of turmoil, especially its operations directorate. So yeah, he that's something that I think Congress should take a look at. What happened under John Brennan's watch at CIA, and is the CIA an organization that is in need of reform?
And maybe even a more global conversation about the politicization of justice, FBI, and CIA, and to some extent NSA, when guys like Hayden are over there, too, tweeting pictures of Auschwitz to compare to Trump's family separation policy at the border. The politicization of all these intelligence and law enforcement agencies that really rely on credibility with the American public as institutions of federal law enforcement and national security.
Well, certainly the FBI, I think that's the case. I mean, there definitely needs to be some type of reform effort, or at least a commission to look into the politicization. I mean, you have 3 top FBI officials who were fired. They weren't just dismissed; they were fired summarily, and they were fired because they basically disgraced the FBI. I think that should warrant a major push by our congressional branch to look into this issue, as you said, of politicization of our national security bureaucracy.
He is Bill Gertz, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, the book I War and Peace in the Information Age. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.